Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Can't explain this. Submitted by Take a Break Driver 8. I just watched your other upload of trucker stories, and not sure if you're aware that it's screwed up, but for some reason it is. Uncle Josh note. Yes, I am aware of it, and unfortunately I do not have the native files for that video. I lost that hard drive a long time ago. I should probably just take it down. Back to the story. After seeing that, I thought you would enjoy this story that happened to me around 1993. I was hauling a double set of deadheads in upstate New York. I'd gotten off the thruway, which is Interstate 90 for those of you not familiar with the state. I just had to drop off both trailers, but the place I had to go was in an industrial park way out in the middle of nowhere. It was about a 20-mile haul north of the 90, and it was pretty late at night, so there weren't a lot of traffic on the very rural road I was on. I was just cruising along listening to music when a message came over Sesame Street that a driver was in trouble. He was asking for anyone to answer him, so I did. He was actually pretty much on the same route I was heading. He said he'd pulled over and wasn't feeling well and thought maybe he was suffering from a heart attack. I immediately told him to call Channel 9 to get the police out there, and he said that he'd done that, but was still waiting for them. He actually sounded in good spirits, and I kept talking to him, making sure that he was still okay as the state police were on their way. We exchanged our radio handles, and I'll never forget his was Furbone. That made me laugh, and then he told me his real name was George Kennedy. I told him that I loved him in Cool Hand Luke, and he laughed at that and said he felt strange, like something was going to happen. I got a little nervous, and I told him to just hang in there, and he stayed with me on for a while, and when I told him that I was probably about 8 miles south of him, I would stop when I got up to him. He just said okay, and I didn't hear back from him. Well, I did get up to him, but his rig was already surrounded by state police vehicles. There were flares out, and I could see one of the troopers looking at me and waiting for me to pass. I didn't, and I pulled over to the side as best I could without blocking the northbound lane. I got out and walked over to the trooper, and he asked if there was anything he could help me with. And I said, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure I was just talking to this guy. I'm glad you're here. Is he okay?" The trooper looked at me for a long, hard minute and said, "You were just talking to this guy?" I said, "Yeah, his name is George. And he told me he wasn't feeling well and that he'd already called you, but he was just looking for someone to talk to." The trooper told me to stay right there and walked over to what I guess was a lieutenant or captain. I'm not really sure how that ranking works with the Bears. They both came back to me, and I told them my story again and how I had just talked to George for the past 10 or 15 minutes. This guy in charge looked at me and said, "You been drinking tonight?" I said, "No." He said, "Are you on any medications?" I said, "No." And he said, "Okay, but I have a few questions for you." I told him that I would take any sobriety test he wanted, and that I was 100% sure of the conversation that I just had was with this George Kennedy in the vehicle in front of me. He took a moment and then told me flat out that they'd been with George's rig for the past hour and a half. He was gone before they even got to him, and there was absolutely no way he could have been talking to me on Sesame Street or any other channel. I was dumbfounded. I even told them his handle, and they said, "Yeah, we know, it's written on the side of his door." The trooper gave me his card and told me that I needed to give them all my information as they might be reaching out to me in the future, but he assured me that this George Kennedy had been dead for at least an hour. I was shaken, and I got back into my rig, got all my information out, including where I was going to be the following week, and that I would reach out to him just to make sure if they needed to speak with me again. In the heart of hearts of mine, I knew they wouldn't be asking me anything because they probably thought I was crazy. But I know I talked to George. I mean, how would I have known his name? How would I have known his location? How would I have known his handle? I eventually got back on the road and slowly passed by George's rig, And there it was on the door, Furbone, with an address in North Carolina. I can't tell you exactly why that happened or how it happened, but it did. I spoke to a guy who apparently was dead. The state police never followed up with me, and after I made 1 or 2 calls to them, I stopped as well. Pretty screwed up, and it stayed with me for a long, long time. Every time I drove that route, I would slow down at the spot where he passed away, got on the CB, and asked if Furbone had his ears on. He never did after that night. I hope you enjoyed this story. It's 100% true. Rest Station Scare, submitted by OTR Madman. After I went to school for a degree in business, I decided to work for my old man. He owned a trucking company that needed some office support as the business was growing. Part of the deal was also that I also needed to be licensed to drive in case the need came up, and it did time to time. I loved working for my dad and always had growing up and learned a lot about mechanical stuff too. I guess it was in my blood. So while doing office stuff and reorganizing things, I was also working on my CDLA. We were expanding, and I now understood why my dad wanted me to be able to pitch in. Honestly, I liked it more than shining a seat with my butt, and when he bought a brand new 2018 Freightliner Cascadia, a job came up that needed my help. I went nuts inside. This thing was a monster, and after my dad pulled me aside, read me the Quiet Riot Act that if I screwed this up there'd be hell to pay. Then he slapped me on the cheek as he always did and said, "This is a quick one, here to Des Moines and back." It was a 2-day trip with no real rush, kind of testing the waters, I suppose. So off I went, driving from Erie to Des Moines. I got there in just about 11 hours after leaving about 3 a.m., and I took a rest while I waited for lollygaggers to get the shipment loaded. I watched a movie and tried out the other amazing features of the cab. My dad called me and told me that I should check the forecast as it looked like there was going to be some rough weather coming back, and that I was not to be a tough guy, pull over and ride it out if I had to. I waited more than I had to, slept, and then woke up at around 11 at night, and then I started back for home. The weather did come around 4 a.m., and it was bad. High winds, crazy rain going sideways, and I called my dad and woke him up. He asked where I was, and then said, "Get to Ottawa, Illinois, and get off the road." He knew a friend who had a warehouse where I could pull in and ride out the storm, which was still coming up behind me. It didn't look like it was going to be letting up anytime soon. I found the exit, found the warehouse, and pulled in. I left the engine running, made some coffee, and was just going to watch another movie and wait for things to subside. It was about 3 a.m. or so, and that's when I noticed a massive bright light coming straight at my rig. At first I thought it was another guy pulling in to get out of the storm, but it just flooded my entire cab. But then, like someone turning off a light switch, it went out. I turned off the movie, dimmed the interior lights, and looked out into the lightning-streaked sky. There was nothing out there, no other vehicles in the lot. I wanted to smoke badly, but we had a work policy about no smoking in the rigs, so I was trying to figure out a way to grab one without getting drenched. I pulled on my overcoat, got into the driver's seat thinking, I can grab a few quick puffs before getting soaked. And that's when I froze. There was this thing right outside my window looking in. Big head, big black eyes, gray skin, just like all those alien movies. Later, I heard they were called Greys. At first, I kind of looked at myself in the mirror and thought, "You've been watching way too many movies, dummy." But when I looked back, it was there, and it just still stood there on my step looking in at me. We didn't move for what seemed like forever, and then it sort of moved its head to the side and looked over my shoulder. I turned my head around, and there was another one on the other side of my truck. Now I knew that this was real, and I yelled out, scrambled back to my bed looking for any kind of weapon I could find. I found nothing. I leaned back and saw that they were still standing there looking in. Then one raised a hand-like thing, and they both kind of floated backwards and down. I watched as they moved to the edge of the lot I was parked in, and then the bright light flashed on again and stayed that way for a few minutes. My entire cab was filled with light. The rain stopped, and the light went out. When I looked, there was nothing out there. After a while, I summoned the nuts to check things out, and when I went outside, it was dead quiet. There was a funny smell in the air, like ozone, and I was just shaking. I tried to call my dad, but he didn't answer this time. I grabbed a smoke, got back in, and got the hell out of there. When I got home, I told everyone, and people laughed at me when I told them what I saw. But I'm not kidding. Those things were real. They didn't try to get in or harm me, but who knows how long they had been sitting there watching me. Well, after I made my stop, I stayed off the road for a bit. I've never seen anything like it again. Any other drivers out there see anything like this? My Dad Drove a Psycho, submitted by Andy P. My dad was a long-haul trucker for most of my youth. He would be gone for days on end and then home on weekends, but my mom raised me and my brother well. He would always bring us really cool things back from where his travels took him, and he was a really great guy. We lost him last year due to this COVID crap. He was only 70 in really good shape, but I guess it goes to show you that sometimes it doesn't matter. When your days are up, your days are up. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. One story he told me was that when I was about 5 or 6. It was probably the creepiest thing that I'd ever heard. He was driving somewhere in Kentucky, headed to Louisville, and he stopped to fill up and get something to eat at a truck stop. He told me that he grabbed one more coffee to go and got back to his truck and noticed this guy standing outside of it. My dad was always wary of people like this and immediately was suspicious as to why this guy was hanging around his truck. When he got over to him, he asked him what he was doing and what he wanted. He said the guy was really sweaty, kind of shaking a little bit. He said his name, which I don't remember, and that he had been walking to Louisville. He was looking for a ride as he needed to be there that evening. He said he'd been walking for over a day, he didn't have a vehicle of his own, and that he would pay for a ride. When my dad asked why he had to go there, he said something about having to visit his mother, that he had screwed up his life, and he didn't have any other way of getting there. He went on to say that he was an only child and had kind of run away as a kid, and again was trying to get his life together, and wanted to be with his mother as she was not feeling well. He was the last in the family. My dad said he mulled it over in his head and thought it through, and then decided, all right, he actually looks pretty legit. And he was headed that way anyway, and he was convinced by the guy's story. So they both got in and drove into Louisville, and my dad dropped him off at some place before his delivery spot. The guy thanked him and tried to pay him, but my dad said, no big deal. Good luck with getting your life together. Good luck with your mom. I hope everything works out. The guy thanked him again, walked away from my dad's truck, and my dad never saw him again. Well, he sort of saw him again, but not in person. Later that day, my dad was at a bar having something to eat and a beer, and he was watching the TV behind the bar. It was a local newscast, and one of the stories was about a guy who had murdered his wife in Bowling Green. My dad had picked this guy up at a truck stop outside of Elizabethtown on the way to Louisville. It's pretty much a straight shot. They showed a picture of the guy on the news, and my dad knew it was definitely that guy. My dad dropped what he was doing, ran to a payphone, and called the police. They told him not to leave, and they were sending someone out to talk to him. A detective came out and talked to my dad and asked him to go to the local station to talk more, and my dad said he felt like the guy was suspicious of him and somehow helping this guy who was on the run. After an hour or so, they determined that my dad had just picked up some random hitchhiker, or so my dad thought, but it did sound a lot like this guy. They never caught him. That I do know. My dad tried to follow the story as it panned out, and years later he reached out to the same police department, and while they couldn't tell him much, they said it was still an open case. My dad never felt bad about it, but he said it did shake him up, that he was in the same small and close space for a considerable time with someone who was as ruthless as that guy was, who would kill his wife. It was then I decided that I was never going to be a trucker. Never again. Submitted by Anonymous. Okay, I'm submitting this anonymously just because I don't want anyone to even put anything together as to my identity. I know it sounds like witness protection shit, but seriously, this was so fucked up, it made me and my friend quit our jobs not too long after. We were working for an auction company, just driving a flatbed around and picking up vehicles that my boss would send us out to get. One late afternoon, he got a call and needed us to go on a run a few towns over to get this BMW that apparently couldn't be passed by. He told us he would throw in an extra $50 apiece if we could go and get it and bring it back, as it was after the normal hours we worked. We figured, what the hell, who can turn down an extra $50? And we made our way out there. The address was way out in the boonies, and the directions were pretty simple. The guy had left the keys in the car at this house or whatever, and all we needed to do was drag it up onto the flatbed and take off. I'm going to make sure that my friend remains nameless as well. It was getting dark when we got to the spot, and we had to drive down this long dirt road to what looked like an old garage. There wasn't any house or anything around, but yeah, there was a really nice-looking BMW there. I don't remember the model. We didn't care. We were looking forward to a long weekend and maybe tipping a beer or two back after this last job. We got everything together and got the car secure on the flatbed, and it took a few minutes to jockey around back and forth so we could head out back to the road, and then we were on our way. About 10 minutes down the road, we had the windows down and could hear a couple of crotch rockets coming up from behind us. They zoomed past us at an extremely high rate of speed, and I yelled out, "Holy shit, those guys are fucking crazy!" We kept driving for a while, and then about another few minutes later, we noticed that both bikes were stopped in both the left and right-hand lane, and the guys were standing there in front of their bikes. Of course, I slowed down after hitting the horn, but they weren't going anywhere, and I certainly wasn't going to kill anybody. We came to a stop, and the guys came over, one on each side of our truck. I looked in the rearview mirror and noticed that 2 other cars had pulled up behind me, and for one moment I thought, okay, good, these guys are going to get yelled at by these other people who just want to get to where they're going. But that went away when the cars both stopped, and 5 or 6 other guys came out and walked up to the back of our truck. The next thing I knew, I had a gun pointed in my face by one of the guys wearing a helmet from one of the bikes. My friend looked over and yelled, and the same thing was happening to him. Without saying a word, they motioned us to get out of the truck. We did, and they made us walk to the back of the truck where all the other guys were standing. They were all wearing bandanas up around their face, and one guy in a very deep voice stood in front of me and said something like, "Give me the keys." I handed him the keys to the truck, and he slapped my hand, and I dropped them. He said, "No, asshole, the keys to the car." I stood there not doing anything for a second, but noticed that the 2 guys that had ushered us out of the truck had put their guns up, pointing at us in a pretty meaningful way. I wasn't going to risk anything for this, and immediately reached into my pocket and handed the keys to the car over. They told us to get over on the side of the road, lay on our stomachs with our arms and legs out. We did it as the 2 guys from the bike stood over us with their guns still pointed at us. We could hear the other guys rummaging around in the car. Being a moron, I stealthily turned my head slightly so I could see what was going on. And I couldn't tell you what it was, but they were unloading tons of white bags of what I can only guess was cocaine or heroin. They put all of them into these plastic cases, and 2 of the guys walked back to one of the cars, put them in the trunk, and the guy who asked me for the keys came back. He told the 2 guys that had been watching us to get our wallets and IDs, and they did. I mean, what were we going to do? I was basically almost shitting myself that I was going to be killed. The guy went through our wallets, then dropped them back down, threw the keys at me, and said, "This didn't happen. If you think it did, we know where to find you. Count to 500, and then you can leave." We heard everyone get back into the vehicles and drive off, and the crotch rockets fire up and also speed away. After a couple of seconds, like I was really going to count to 500, we jumped up, got into the truck, and got the hell out of there. We noticed that they had put everything back in our wallets as it had been, including our IDs. We flew back as fast as we could to the auction yard lot, got the car off the flatbed, gave the keys to my boss, parked the truck where it was supposed to go, and got into our own vehicles and got the hell out of there, too. We went out to a bar and immediately had shots and beers looking at each other, not even recognizing the way we looked. I mean, we were both frazzled beyond all hell, pale, sweating bullets, and just totally freaked out. We never told anybody that this happened, and certainly not my boss. I did notice that the next day that I had to go to work, the car was already gone, and it must have already been sold before going to auction. Looking back, I wonder if my boss had anything to do with any of this stuff. I mean, he wasn't always on the up and up. I mean, don't get me wrong, he paid us well and was a pretty good boss, but I'm pretty sure he was into some pretty questionable activities. As I mentioned, not long after, we both quit and got jobs elsewhere. I haven't seen or talked to that friend of mine for many years, but I'm sure he still looks back at this and is still shaken up as I still am. It's kind of scary to know that you got caught up in some really, really crazy shit and that the people who were involved know who you are. Thankfully, I moved to Florida and don't have to worry about it as much, but I'm sure my friend still lives back there where we lived when we took that job. I hope he's doing well. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have a true scary story of any nature and would like to hear it narrated on my channel, email unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Please like, share, and subscribe to this video. And if you haven't already, make sure you hit the notification button so that you know every time I upload. Follow me on social media. All the links to that are in the description below. And guys, I gotta tell you, I'm tired to death. I just lost my cousin yesterday. Nothing to do with any of the other stuff that we've been talking about that's so prevalent in the news. But if you are a faithful listener, you will remember me mentioning him when I did Boy Scout stories a while back. And there was a story about a tornado that hit a scout camp that my cousin was actually at. That's the cousin that I just lost. So total bummer. Like I said, I'm just sick of death. All I can do is wish everybody the best. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.